Welcome to this explainer. Right, today we're taking a rather dark, honestly pretty cynical descent into the grim realities of the human psyche. Picture a graphic novel painted entirely in shades of gray and gothic dusk. We're looking at a macabre fable where our deepest psychological defenses are literal stone walls, and our darkest fears are the monsters lurking right there in the margins. Today we're exploring the tale of the Wanderer and the Siblings of the Spill. It's a philosophical deep dive into exactly what happens when our own intellect traps us, and the painful, yet often hilarious process of tearing that trap down.
You have built a cathedral of logic to house a ghost. Wow. Just let that sink in for a second. This incredibly mocking quote comes from a character known as the Wit, and it instantly exposes the Wanderer's self-serious hubris. It's a brilliant, cynical critique of the human ego. Because, think about it, we spend years constructing these massive, intricate intellectual arguments just to justify our isolation, our fears, our anxieties. But at the dead center of all that grand architecture, there's nothing but a shivering, formless ghost.
Okay, let's dive into this with part one, the architecture of isolation.
So we meet the Wanderer at the absolute height of his self-delusion. And this brings us to our core concept, the infinite dungeon. Now look, this isn't a physical place with iron bars and fire-breathing dragons. It's a direct metaphor for a self-imposed psychological prison. We build it out of rigid defense mechanisms, using intellectualization and this sense of absolute certainty to avoid one truly terrifying thing, vulnerability. When we overthink, when we try to map out every possible variable so we never get hurt, we aren't actually protecting ourselves. We're just making the walls of our own dungeon infinitely thicker.
Just look at the pathetic irony of the Wanderer's situation. Here he sits atop the pale peak, completely and utterly isolated, actually believing his loneliness is a monument of stone to his own strength. He projects this mask of stoic certainty, but behind that mask, he's got trembling hands. He is literally terrified of his own shadow. He uses his intellect to hide his fear, putting on this brave face while just shivering in the cold void he created.
Let's move on and see how this builds in part 2, Cracking the Diamond Skull.
The Wanderer genuinely believes his mind is a fortress. He views his own brain as this construct of merciless intellect, a diamond-hard structure that can totally withstand the biting wind of the existential abyss. It's the ultimate fantasy of the chronic overthinker, right? This belief that if you are just smart enough and logical enough, nothing in the universe can ever touch you or break you.
But then, the Wit approaches. He steps out like a beast of distorting glass and laughs. You believe you are made of granite, but look at your hands. They are trembling. He simply reaches out and taps the Wanderer right on the brow. And what happens? Instead of the ring of stone, there was only the dull thud of wet cardboard. It is a moment of pure, brutal, theatrical irony. The Wanderer's impenetrable armor, his unbreakable diamond skull of logic, is exposed as completely fake. His intellect wasn't diamond at all. It was just papier-mâché.
And just like that, the entire psychological collapse begins. The rigid walls of his self-perception literally just fall apart into a heap of delightful absurdity. And honestly, it's a massive relief. As this false sense of self crumbles, the gothic dusk of his mind is finally ruptured. For the very first time, his mind can actually breathe. The joke is absolutely on him, but it's a joke that actually sets him free.
So how does this happen? Well, let's look at part 3, Siblings of the Spill.
So the crucial point here is that the Wanderer's forced isolation is completely dismantled by 3 really strange forces. This sequence of ego dismantling happens in 3 essential steps. First, the Wit causes the collapse of the intellectual ego, which we just saw. Second, the hunger facilitates the devouring of isolation. And third, the small triggers the unbinding of whim. Let's look at exactly how these siblings disrupt his rigid mental habits.
The Wanderer tries to draw these elaborate maps with precise equations to navigate his dungeon. But then, the hunger creeps in. It's this beast-like spirit that finds those rigid expectations highly nutritious. It literally swallows the threads of order. His logical map dissolves into a total cacophony of, how did this happen? Then, the Small steps in. As the Wanderer walks stiffly with his lantern of absolute certainty, the Small provides a gentle, chaotic nudge. He trips. The lamp spills. But instead of tragedy, it creates an artful mistake.
The Small acts as this gentle breeze that reminds a stiff world how to dance. When that lamp spills, the Wanderer fully expects a decree of execution. He literally expects his world to end because he made a mistake. But instead, embracing this unpredictable whim turns it into a decree of desert. By allowing chaos and mistakes in, the infinite loop of existential doom is finally broken. The stiff, isolated intellectual is forced to play.
And this brilliantly illustrates our next point in Part 4, Hermit Kings versus Glass Cathedrals. Because the ego doesn't just give up easily, right? We see two desperate ways it tries to maintain false control. On one side, we have the parable of the Hermit King. The wanderer retreats to a dark corner, crowning himself king of nowhere, writing pointless laws in the dust to hide from his own shadow. It's the pathetic throne of discarded idols. On the other side, we have the parable of the Glass Cathedral. He tries to rebuild, but this time using the clear glass of pure reason. He thinks if everything is totally transparent and logical, he can't possibly be trapped. But a world of pure reason is completely stiff and breathless. It's not freedom. It's just a brighter, more brittle prison.
So the wit returns from the margins of the map to act as the essential pressure valve. He looks at this flawless, breathless glass cathedral and he just lets out a single, booming laugh. And with absolute cynical perfection, that laugh resonates at the exact frequency of the wanderer's ego. The glass cathedral doesn't just break, it shatters into a million pieces. The illusion of pure logical control is completely destroyed all over again.
Which leads us straight into our final chapter. Part 5, the unscripted comedy.
What actually happens when the dust settles and that psychological blueprint is entirely torn apart? This is where our story reaches its beautiful, super messy climax. The ruined glass cathedrals don't form a new trap. Instead, the shards become a kaleidoscope of possibility. The wanderer falls from his wobbling pedestal of intellect, not into the dark abyss, but into a messy, totally unscripted improvisation. He is finally, truly liberated from the burden of his own towering height.
Through the dismantling of his ego, the wanderer realizes that the tragedy of forced order, that miserable gray existence of trying to control every single variable, can actually be rewritten. Because of the disruptive influence of the siblings of the spill, his life becomes a grand, unscripted comedy. It's a mocking but deeply enlightened shift. He stops trying to be the stoic architect of a stone fortress and instead becomes a willing, active participant in a vibrant, unpredictable play.
And that is the ultimate lesson of the infinite dungeon. The ink must always remain wet. The damp page signifies that our psychological story is never static. The exact moment you think you have yourself entirely figured out, the moment you believe your intellectual blueprint is totally finished, you have just locked the door to a brand new cell. Intellectual finality is just another trap. Freedom actually lies in the mess, the mistakes, and the wet ink of the next line.
So, I leave you with this final thought to ponder about your own mental architecture. Look at the defenses you've built, the logic you use to keep the unpredictable world at bay. Are you sitting on a pale peak with trembling hands, trapped in a dungeon of your own making? Or are you willing to let the glass shatter, embrace the delightful absurdity of your own papier-mâché ego, and ensure your ink is still wet?